Greetings, everybody. Here we are in our first series, chess. We started, this whole thing with day in the life. We were trying to get a video up for YouTube, but we finished it 2 months later, and the editor hasn't even finished it 2 years later. So we're better late than never, huh? So we got a chess game, a wonderful chess game between me and Pyotr Urbanov. No, what am I saying? Pyotr Urbansky. Okay, he's from Poland. Very good player. And, he's 22, 24. So, and thing is that might not be the way you pronounce it, because the thing is, it reminds me of an old story, because that's the thing about, you see something written in that's Polish, and it's written in normal English letters. It frequently is not pronounced the way we would, like we'd say Krakow, and that's not the way they say it. So it reminds me of the question. He says, what does a new Polish bride get on her honeymoon that's long and hard? Think about that for a second. But it's obvious. A new name. So, for those of you who are more new to chess, I'll point out one of the key things about that as when we look at things, the terms loose and hanging. And for instance, a loose piece is a piece that's not protected. See, these rooks in the corner are not protected, right? And so if I played c4, this pawn is not protected by anything. So it's subject to a attack. So let's just say we had a pawn at g4 and one here, and a rook could go here and attack both at the same time. So loose pieces are weak. And hanging pieces are pieces that are attacked more than they're protected. Now, if I protected this piece with a knight, like here at a3, and he attacked it with a pawn, it would still be loose. It's protected once, attacked once. So, okay, so let's begin. And we'll start out here. The first move is d4. So I play d4. And very popular moves, there's a bunch of them. They copy you with d5. They play knight to f6. They play the Benoni, which is c5, inviting you to take space, but then there'll be like a guerrilla movement attacking behind with the holes you left over. And there's a lot of different stuff. Okay, so here's the thing, is that Black can play all those, but he plays a very popular one. This is called the Indian defense. Okay, and a lot of different openings come from this. The move played the most is c4. So the idea is, okay, so he brought his knight out. So we want to bring our knights out in our different pieces. But if we put the pawn at c4, it exerts more pressure over d5. So that when we finally put the knight at c3, we're trying to get a good, strong grip on it. In fact, if we just play knight to c3, a common move, which most often leads to the Veresovs, after they play d5, where's our edge? And so as a rule, we use our c-pawn to attack into the center. But it leads to a gigantic amount of opening theory, an endless row of opening theory. The Budapest, the Queen's Indian, the King's Indian, the Nimzo Indian, blippity bloppity bloop. It never ends. So some of us say, well, let's play the Trompovsky. And Trompovsky attacks the knight. Bishops are better than knights, so you have to be careful with these kinds of trades. The Trompowsky is a different bird than, say, the Chigorin, where you give up the bishops and you have the knights, and then sometimes you can't find strong points for your knights, though it's an interesting opening. Tarjan has demonstrated how to crush it. Tarjan's quite a good player. So here's the thing, is now there's some ideas associated with this. So a number of different moves that can be played. C5 is one. Very, very, what do you call it, consistent and thematic. And a very good idea. The black bishop has left the queen side, and so black proceeds to attack on the queen side dark squares. Very good move. You can play d5 straight away. You can play e6, a move that Anatoly Karpov likes, and he says basically, I just really don't care about your bishop at g5. You're just going to end up in main lines anyway, and I'll be better than you in them. Okay? So, number of different, ideas here. So we're going to look at one where they say, well, I don't, they also play a King's Indian. So here he plays d5. And if we just play moves like e3 and c4, we'll just transpose back into the Queen's Gambit lines. And it'll be, lots of mainstream theory. But the Trompowsky has a very unique idea to all these usual systems, and the idea is, wham! We just take it. We give him the advantage of the bishop for the knight. And the issue is, what White's getting for that is he's getting pawn structure damage. So whatever happens, whatever black does, his pawn change is compromised. So for instance, if he played G takes at F, well, for one thing, there's a lot of chunky cheese potholes in this king side. So we're going to get to attack him one way or the other, and getting to the queen side, if he tries to go over there, is not going to be hard. So it's playable, but here we're going to look at Piotr plays E takes at F. Maybe Piotr is pronounced Mulash. I don't know. What do I know? Okay. Now, here's the neat idea, because we'll get to see the difference here. With the e-pawn no longer at this particular space, okay, one of our ideas is that we're going to play c4. And we want to trade this d for c. Or we'll let him have a d, and that'll be another issue. The idea of trading a d for c is this, okay, is that if the pawn were back here at e7, okay, once these are traded off, black always has the ability to strike out at this d pawn. He can do it with his c pawn or his e pawn. And note that if he does it with the c pawn, okay, White can advance this pawn and go past, but there's an e pawn, and it's not a passed pawn, and so black can try to even up things to create a situation of what you got, I got it too. But see, so this is beautiful. So now if we let's go back and forward, get rid of those. If we played c5 straight away, when he plays pawn takes pawn, now we've got a black pawn at c4 we have to recapture. But also, we have a circumstance where, this pawn here is loose, and so I don't want to have, I don't want to go queen check, queen c4 and retake it and so forth. So let's make it simple, and let's first play e3. We'll let the bishop out, so that if we play pawn to c4, when he takes, we take it all in one blast. And we have a solid presence in the center, this d4 pawn. This is one of the beauties of the Trompowsky. We have this rock. Yasser Seirawan used that term, in a different position, when he was very young. And this is a little story no one will care about, but I find it amusing. I was playing him after Anatoly Karpov beat Polagaevsky in their candidates match. And I was trying to go, I'm gonna play like Karpov, you know, with the exception of I did play like Karpov, but without the skill. Okay, so sometimes that can be ugly, because the skill part is definitely needed. But anyway, he was playing a Sicilian. Okay, and I'll show you what Sicilian line this is. This is definitely going off the reservation here, going way off. So let's say he goes E4, C5. He's playing Polyevsky. Okay, so knight to F3. Okay, D6, D4. C takes at D. Knight takes at D4. Okay, knight to F6, attacking the E pawn, which is loose. And after there was attacked, it was hanging, so he protects it. Now he plays this, which leads to the Najdorf complex. And so at that time, tons of theory was put on bishop to G5, which was kind of the main line. You can play F4. You know, at that time, less popular, but certainly playable. It was to try and be like Velimirovich and put the bishop at C4. But Karpov just goes a nice steady bishop to E2. And so what would ultimately happen is, I'm going to fast forward in general, is, you know, some differing move orders. What would happen is you'd get a situation where, say, at some point white plays F4 and then white would retake there. And so, and you'd have a situation where this is an isolated pawn on an open file, and the D pawn's an isolated pawn on the open file, but white has more space and more boardroom. And so I was mocking Yasser when we were playing our blitz games and saying, you know, well, what do you think? You know, it's like you got a rotten position. And then he would say, I've got a piece of the rock. And he would go on at some point to post his knight at E5, and it was really effective. And this is when he wasn't as good as he was going to be. You know, ultimately he was a crazy level good. He was playing against Anatoly Karpov. But anyway, piece of the rock. Now, okay, let's go back to our position here in the Trompowsky. We take that. I go here. Okay. And my point being is this is a rock in the center. If black has only one pawn, and if he attacks it with the C pawn, we can pass, and we get a passed D pawn. So we're just going to have something. We're going to have some form of advantage, though black has lots of things they can do. So anyway, and so what do I do? So he plays there. And quite often people play pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, and then I really like this starting position. And I like this starting position even more when they play bishop to D6. Because the first thing I do is I play C takes at D. You know, there's my piece of rock in the center, the D4 pawn. It's part of a pawn chain protected by E3, which is protected by F2. And now black retakes, but his pawn is not part of a healthy pawn chain. Why? Because his previously E pawn was diverted to F6 by our bishop takes knight. And so what'll happen is, I'm just going to keep attacking this like crazy. Like crazy, man. Yeah, like crazy. Oh, you wouldn't believe it. We're just going to attack it until it falls. And it's going to fall. I consider this virtually a loss of a pawn. A loss of the pawn when you're talking about when we get this position. It's just a very fun position to get. So let's go here. So, you know, most people just play knight to C3. My preference here is to play bishop to E2 because I wanted to sneak up on him how weak that is. Bishop E2 looks just like a lame-o, move. Instead of putting the bishop aggressively at D3, aiming at the king's side and ready to fist fight, I just silently put it at A2. Oh, nothing's happened. Go to sleep. Go to sleep, Piotr or Agmosh or whatever you pronounce that as. Go to sleep now. And so he plays knight to C6. And now I play bishop to F3. I'm just developing it. This allows me to bring my knight to e2 and the other knight to go to c3. It's very useful in the case where they move the dark squared bishop twice, because then when you castle, the pin isn't very useful. And then you've also got queen to b3. That pawn is dead. It's not a matter of if, but when. So he plays bishop to e6, protecting it. And I play knight to c3. And now it's attacked twice, protected once. We have to be careful the order that we do this in, right? So let's say, all right, well, let's say what he does. He does. So he plays a6, right? But suppose we make this error and we play knight takes at d5. And then he plays bishop takes at d5. And then we play bishop takes at d5. Now this piece is loose, but unfortunately, see that king? It's on this diagonal. And so the queen can play check, double attack. So I have to block the check or move the king, and I drop the bishop at d5. It's very bad. An important issue when it comes to loose and hanging. Okay, so let's go back. If we're going to take it, we're going to take it first with the bishop. Now my thinking is, I'm so confident that pawn is dead, I can take it now, but I want to wait and take it later. I want to complete more development, so forth, because I want him to sit and stew and suffer and pretend he can keep this pawn and ruin his pieces and place his pieces so that their function and duty is to protect the pawn rather than to attack me and beat me up with their evil force. So I put it off. I'd probably recommend that you just take it. It's probably best just get it out of the way. Don't make things complicated. But I just had this attitude at the time, So I played knight to e2. I said, I'm going to eat that later. He castles. I can still just play bishop takes. How simple is that? Probably should just take it. I castle. Ha ha ha. I'm so coy. Probably dumb. You should just take the pawn. Don't make it complicated. Well, you invite him to play knight to e7, and then you play queen to b3, and you're doing these things. Now, see, if the bishop wasn't on this diagonal, this arrogance would be okay, because once the knight hits f4, that's it for the protection. No, he can't find enough protectors, and the pawn drops. So I'm openly saying what I'm doing is dumb. I should just take it. So anyway, so he goes bishop to c7. And what does this do? It uncovers the queen to protect it. So now it's protected twice. Attack once, twice. And he has another protector he can stick there at e7. And then if we haven't noticed, he can be, annoying and play queen to d6, which threatens checkmate at f2. Yow! Oh, that's the way of the world. Okay, so anyway, I go, all right. So, what plan do I want? Well, I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to at some point play g3 and allow the bishop, to come back in and, continue. And then go win the pawn that I could have just taken any moment really easily. So I played rook to e1. The idea of rook to e1 is I'm going to play g3, but then should he play bishop to h3, which would attack that rook at f1, I would have to spend the tempo moving the rook to e1. So I'll just move the rook first, and technically that should prevent bishop to h3. And so now he plays queen to d6. It's threatening checkmate in 2, right? No, not 2. Check, king over, queen check at h1, and I have a miracle move, knight to g1. But it's hardly a very good game. It's not very fun, It's like you just go, well, I didn't get mated, but I ruined my position. So I play what I planned. I play g3. And now, Yoigash, I don't know how they pronounce it. Anyway, he's a very good chess player. One should look through a lot of his games. I have looked at his games, and I like him as a chess player. Anyway, he plays bishop to h3, but now he loses a tempo. And guess what? Now, not only is the bishop now hanging, but with one tempo, knight attacks d5, knight attacks d5, bishop attacks d5. He doesn't have time to play, to have his bishop at e6 and bring the knight to e7. And so he, what does he do? So he moves the bishop to d7. And then what do? I go, thank you. I love that. And this happens in chess frequently. It's like you're in shock. It's like, what happened? What happened? I'm down a pawn. I lost tempos. I'm suffering. My bishop is losing. He's going to get his dark squared bishop back. This is horrible. And he goes, I must attack him. I must smash his face into paper mulch. And he fires out, bam, g5. We're sending pawns down here. We're going to kill you. In any number of setups. We may shove the f pawn all the way through. We may knock the bishop down, advance the h pawn, open the h file, move the king to g7, move the rook here. We're just coming to get you. How dare you take our pawn, you scummerton. But this move immediately loses to the surprising, but not necessarily deep, knight to e4. And he resigns because it may appear like you can take the knight with the queen, but then the knight takes the pawn check, fork, attacking the king and attacking the queen. And so we could choose to take with the bishop or the knight. It would all depend. If he just goes to h8, we have fielder's choice. If he comes up, we would probably take with the knight, because if we take with the bishop, then the knight would be hanging. So let's look at that. So, all right, so his queen's hanging, and, let's say he makes the blunder. Queen takes a d5, knight takes check. And you see when he attacks, when he puts king to g7, the knight is hanging to the king. So if you take the queen with the bishop, you lose your knight. Why give away free? You're still winning, but you're losing free stuff. So instead, you'll take it with a knight. Anyway, he resigns, and that's a fun game. And that's with the Trompovsky, where they play d5 and allow you to give them an isolated pawn. Dun 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 dun.